Bienvenue, les aventures de Frank et Ben. 6e série, Frank and Ben go on a picnic with Ruth and Sally. Première histoire, Frank and Ben go on a picnic, part 11. After turning some pages and looking ahead in the manuscript, Sally continues to read out loud. Excitement was high on the bus after we left the Sudbury bus terminal and continued east. Everyone knew we'd soon be coming across the scene of the accident. I call it an accident because the young man who had caused it was clearly out of his head. Moreover, we didn't know it was anything other than an accident until much later when it was written up in the newspapers. It finally came into view when the bus slowed down on one of those desolate stretches of the Trans-Canada Highway that are so common and nearly make up the whole of it. Night had already fallen, and the first thing we saw were some road flares. Then we noticed a couple of police cars, and finally the overturned bus with a thick cable attached to it. About 100 feet away from the bus and parked on the shoulder of the highway was a huge tow truck. Apparently it was ready to pull the bus out of the very wide and shallow ditch in which it lay on its side. At the time we were going past this scene, I happened to be on my way back to my seat. I had been sitting at the front of the bus with my 10-year-old friend who, as I mentioned earlier, had a traveling bag full of Asterix comic books. As I passed by Carlotta, I was struck by the fact that despite the depressing sight outside, she was totally immersed in one of her books. While others were straining to get a look at the overturned bus, she kept her nose in this book and seemed oblivious to all around her. From what I can now relate firsthand about this matter, it will be clear that the book reading was responsible for what happened later. Like all other passengers, I was fast asleep when the bus suddenly stopped in the middle of nowhere. The next series of events were as follows. The roof lights went on. The bus driver got out of his seat. He walked down the aisle to where Carlotta was sitting, and he ordered her to take off the reading light that she had strapped to her forehead. At first she didn't respond, but when he repeated his order much more brutally, she immediately turned off the light and put it away. Without another word, the driver then returned to the front, sat down, and had the bus rolling again in seconds. After this very unpleasant incident, I tried to go back to sleep. Every so often I would open my eyes and look in front of me at Carlotta. Not once did I notice her change position or even so much as move a muscle. In the dark, she was like a statue, and she stayed like that for a long time. Even when the sky started to light up and things became more visible, she didn't move. After a couple of hours of non-stop driving, I was no longer trying to get to sleep. A few of the passengers around me were also starting to wake up and murmur. With Frank still snoozing beside me, things stayed like this until the sun first made its appearance. Then, without warning, Carlotta got up, stood shakily in the aisle, and made her way to the front of the bus. To be sure, I wasn't the only one to notice this. and I certainly wasn't the only one to wonder what her intentions were. Indeed, she hadn't gone very far before I heard someone remark that Carlotta might turn out to be as dangerous to her fellow passengers as the psychotic young man was to his. Certainly a general tension had pervaded the bus by the time Carlotta reached the driver. Sitting where I was, I couldn't hear what she said to him. Later I talked to someone who was sitting at the front, and so I was lucky enough to get a first-hand account of it. After coming up to the driver, she said to him, "Excuse me, I didn't mean to cause a problem or create a situation that might be dangerous. It's just that I sometimes get caught up in my reading. When this happens, I'm not as careful as I should be. I realize this is a failing on my part, and hopefully I'll be able to correct it in the future." While she was saying this, she acted perfectly calm and normal. On the other hand, the bus driver seemed to be quite agitated. Hunched over the steering wheel and gripping it very tightly, he looked straight ahead. He seemed totally preoccupied with his driving. After a few seconds, Carlotta went on, "Forgive me for saying this, but I really do think, now that I've apologized and admitted to you the worst I'm capable of, you should address me in a more civil manner than was the case about 3 hours ago." It was then he finally exploded and said what everyone on the bus heard so clearly. "Get back to your seat," he shrieked at her. "You're creating a situation right now that's dangerous. Get back, or I'll call the police."